If you're looking to show up as the most authentic version of yourself in 2020, if your organization needs help with increasing your communication or engagement levels, or if you need help with building your personal or professional brand, Michael Seaver is a phenomenal resource for you here in our local business community. So, Michael is an executive coach, he's a leadership consultant and guest speaker, and will also be featured at one of our January AZ BizLink events. So, tune in for this podcast episode if you want to hear more. Michael, thanks so much for joining me today.
You are very welcome. Thank you for having me.
I would love if you could just share a little bit more about your background and what you've been working on lately.
I moved to Arizona 16 years ago and have done a number of things with regards to working in hospitality, finishing an MBA from the Thunderbird School of Global Management. I worked for a large not-for-profit healthcare entity for a couple of years. Went to Arizona State University to work as an executive career coach for a few years, and have spent the last 5 years running my own small business that's focused on executive coaching, leadership consulting, and then I have a number of other things that I do with regards to podcasting and blogging and book writing and public speaking, all in an effort to just help people become the most authentic versions of themselves.
And just so we can get it out there, what's the name of your company?
So the name of my company is Seaver Consulting LLC, which a lot of people won't necessarily know or find that. But if you just type in my name into your search engine, Michael S. Seaver, my website will come up.
Once people meet you, then they'll see your face everywhere, because I feel like you do such a phenomenal job when it comes to building your personal brand and professional brand. And a lot of people may also know you from our AZ BizLink event. So back in May 15th of 2019, you actually came in and provided a presentation on how to boost employee morale, which was super insightful. We got a lot of great raving reviews on that one, and we're very excited to have you back here in 2020. But getting back to that whole branding thing, what have you found to help you to be more successful when it comes to building your personal brand?
Sure. Thank you for asking. It's actually this weird juxtaposition of needing to be incredibly consistent with a distinct message and just pushing it out through a lot of different varieties and methods and means of distribution, but also being really, really patient. And I think this is the hard part that people kind of misconstrue about branding, is that even when they set a really great and authentic brand, they're not patient or consistent in the delivery of it and how it's going to help people. So when I'm helping a person write their brand and trying to assess and figure out what their brand is, I really want to know their life's mission, why they do what they do. It's really interesting for me to know their top 5 or 6 core values, like lessons they've learned in their life. I try to take into consideration different let's say like communication tactics and things that are motivating them from assessments that we can do anywhere online. Try to put all of those things together and say, okay, layer on top of this the accomplishments that you've had and the certifications and the degrees and titles and all these things that you've had, and say, once we collect all this data about who you are, let's put together, a 5 or 6 or possibly a 7-sentence statement that says, this is who Lindsay is. And then share that through whatever means possible, whether it's the top of your resume, whether it's a LinkedIn profile, whether it's an introductory bio that you might use, whether it's something that somebody says when they introduce you. There's so many ways I think that you can share it, but it's about being really authentic and sharing that patiently and consistently in lots of places.
Yeah, I think a lot of us feel like we have a brand of some form or fashion, but how many of us have actually taken the time to sit there and write it down? I honestly, I can say even for myself, I probably haven't spent that much time in, developing something that concrete.
Sure. So
sounds like a good task or something to challenge all of our listeners to maybe potentially do or look at doing as we kick off 2020. So I'm curious, like as far as just building your brand, as an entrepreneur and getting your name out there, what tactics have you found to be successful with sharing your story?
Yeah. Again, I'm kind of the authenticity guy, right? Yeah. That's a lot of my journey, my story. And so again, if you look at it through the lens of patience and consistency, it really comes down to saying, who is my target audience and where are they? And then thinking about the method of distribution that's going to appeal to them, right? And then if you deploy some sense of consistency with them through whatever means are important to them and how they learn, now it's going to be really obvious for them to know who you are, and then for them to be able to share through peer discussion or through other means, for them to be able to share your name in those circles. So again, take the time to really write that statement, be very, very aware of who your target audience is, figure out where they spend time or what's interesting or engaging to them, and then find ways to share your message in those circles through those means as often as you can.
And I'm so glad we're talking about this, because actually in January of next year, we're launching our new branding series, where once you do have, those different needs, or you understand where you can connect with your target audience, then we can actually help people put together those processes and procedures through different social media platforms, email blasts and whatnot. So that one should be really fun. I'm thinking we're going to have you back for so many different conversations. Who knows? He'll be like our guest speaker once a month. Well, you just love to, the more I've gotten to know you, I know you love to do research, and you always know such interesting and fascinating information. But it kind of leads me into, AZ BizLink and our organization, and also what you do. We're all trying to absorb as much information, and we're all continuing to learn. Yeah. But how much can we actually continue to absorb? What's actually realistic?
So this is the hard part about the work that we do in terms of helping people to become authentic versions of themselves or to become more knowledgeable, is that the world's information is available for free on the World Wide Web. And so we're kind of at this weird tipping point in humanity where how much do we need to absorb through the 5 brainwave states versus what can we just very rapidly look up through our phone or some sort of a learning device. So that's where I really struggle with it, is that I think that we've moved to a place in society where we have to be continual learners. We really don't have much of a choice. And organizations are recognizing that. People are recognizing that. Obviously, there's a ton of people going back for certain degrees, or they're getting advanced certification. So I think we're moving to a place where people know that. So I think it's important that people recognize how we learn, right? So there's 5 brainwave states. Let's see if I can get them right. So gamma is one, and then beta, and then alpha, delta, and theta. Okay, so there's 5 brainwave states, and it's basically how information is passed from neuron to neuron in your brain. But it just so happens that from birth until age 7, the human brain is in the theta brainwave state, which is kind of like a hypnotic state. And so now, as technology advances, we're learning that we can actually learn through hypnosis the same way that from age birth until 7, we're learning just by absorbing all these cool things around us. But traditionally, like in our conversation right now, we're in what's referred to as a beta brainwave state, which is a very traditional rote learning brainwave state. So we have to learn through seeing the thing repetitively. So as technology advances, I think we're still going to learn through a rote means. That's still going to be a thing, but we're also going to now be able to kind of, in almost like a superconductive highway, learn through like a hypnotic state, or learn through things that we put in our earbuds overnight. So we're moving to a different place. So lots of continual learning, lots of new learning methodologies. And this is where people have a chance to say, what do I want to learn and why?
See, every time I talk to you, I learn something new. So, and where do you find a lot of this content? What are your go-to resources for continuing education for yourself?
For me, there are a number of things on LinkedIn and or Instagram that I follow. So I get very short bursts. Like for me, late at night, when my body is just starting to relax and kind of calm down, I will go to some sort of a social media channel, find content that's interesting, or follow interesting people who are doing things that are just a little bit on the edge, and then go to their website in the next couple of days and try to explore in more depth. There are a number of tremendous podcasts that I listen to as well when I'm driving or flying. To me, that's a great thing too. And for some odd reason, I've gotten into some YouTube university material. And so getting into some of the cool videos that exist on YouTube have also been great. So for me right now, it's very episodic, right? But I've got the bachelor's degree, I've done the MBA, I've got certification. So I do learn through traditional means. But to stay on the leading edge, sometimes it's going to social media and seeing things in the moment on the spot.
And I want to get back to your consulting business. What can you help individuals or businesses with here in the local business community?
Yeah, thank you. My focus when it comes to one-to-one coaching, because that's probably how I spend 70 to 75% of my time, is I have a 6-month process where I walk an individual through essentially 6 months of curriculum or content. And the goal of it is to say, what's your mission? What are your top core values? What's your executive brand statement? And then what do we need to do in your life to make an increasing percentage of your day spent living those statements? Because undoubtedly, when they come to me, they're not living their statements, they're disengaged, they're unhappy. So my goal is to help them find a center through those statements and then redistribute their time day to day into things that allow them to communicate better or drive employee engagement for their teams or to help them find happiness at work or at home better. So in a one-to-one setting, that's the focus, that's the goal, it's that 6-month program. Now, when I work with organizations, and I have a number of companies that I work with where I'm just on a monthly retainer, and that could be anything from I help employees just get through really challenging circumstances and scenarios, or I have another organization where I'm helping them design an internal mentorship program, or I have another one where we're going through and setting 5-year plans in place, and what does that look like? What do we need to do in the organization to make that work? So there's a number of different ways that I distribute my time, but it all comes back to, for me, can I help that person or that team become more engaged, more happy, more productive, more authentic? And if I feel like there's a link there for me in that, then I'm interested.
No, and I think that's so important that corporations are now starting to get on board with that, because it really is about the overall human experience. I mean, what's happening at home is coming to work, and what happens at work goes home. So, I mean, certainly I think it's great that some employers are actually, taking a step forward with actually putting together some of these programs and bringing in experts like you.
Yeah.
Who do you feel like you can help the most? I mean, is there like a specific demographic or type of individual or company that you feel like you can impact the greatest?
Yeah, when you think about what we said earlier around target audiences, my message seems to land really well with an executive group. And it's just because of my background and experiences. For some reason, it has kind of leaned a little bit towards helping executives or organizational development professionals or C-suites or boards. And that has just been my path. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the only folks that I help, right? I have clients in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I have a client in Florence, Italy. So I get these phone calls from folks all over the world that aren't necessarily a specific title. But if we're talking about in Metro Phoenix or in the Southwest US, I'm trying to help a small to medium-sized organization that doesn't necessarily have a big human resources department, or they may not have an organizational development function. I can step in and provide some counsel or some strategy or some process to help that team expand itself relatively quickly. And I just love doing that. I just love giving people a chance to figure out a way to become happier in the workplace.
No, I think that's great. For those that are actually watching the YouTube video of this, you'll see Michael is very stylish, and so he always does a phenomenal job. He has the best shirts, socks, and or shoes. You should definitely see his shoes. We'll probably have to put the link on there. You should show him if you can.
Is there a way?
Look at you.
The socks also have a picture of my cat. This is a picture of my cat. So if anybody wants to see those, we can talk about this. You can look at my Instagram account and you'll see them there. Yes.
So is there any methodology that you use when it comes to picking out your outfits when you go to do these presentations?
There really isn't. And what I'm always trying to figure out is how to find a balance between what is societally acceptable versus what can I do that shares just a little bit of my story and my journey for where I'm at right now in my life, versus what is that small thing that inspires someone in the audience to feel safe or comfortable to do that for themselves. And like my shirt, it says actions are greater than words. And it's a very purposeful message for some work that I have to do this afternoon. And I just think that that's important, is that we can say something in a specific message, but we can also say something with the way that we look or the clothes that we wear, the car that we drive, the house that we live in. All of those things can share a message about who we are that we don't know, but possibly will inspire somebody around us to feel safe to do something like that for themselves. And I just want to have that serendipitous luck occur.
Oh, I love that. How about if you could go back and tell your younger self, if you could give yourself some words of advice, what would it be?
I really significantly struggled in the earlier section of my life when I was in my childhood and in my teenage years and early 20s. I was really significantly struggling with not being able to be authentic. And I wish that I would have found more time or found other people to be mentors or guides or coaches or counselors or energy healers or whatever in my life. And for whatever reason, in the small town that I was raised in, those individuals didn't exist, or I wasn't confident enough to go find them. And I wish that if I could turn back the clock, I would have had the opportunity to proactively seek them more. Because as we're learning from a number of different studies, the quality of someone's relationships and the things that we learn from the give and take in those relationships matter so much to our well-being and care. So I wish I would have done more of that in my younger years, not waiting until I was in my mid-20s to really start.
Mm-hmm. So the holidays are quickly approaching. And with that, I feel like a lot of individual stress levels they tend to rise. And I think a lot of times stress is, there's a direct correlation between time and energy management. And time and energy management is something that you're actually coming in to speak about at our January 14th event. And so I'm curious, how do we pick and choose what to say yes and no to as we're trying to navigate our stress levels?
We are in such a weird time in human history, because in human history we haven't had access to all of the technological devices that we do now. And so we are constantly inundated with information and energy and all of these sources of stuff, these interruptions, if you will. And I really want people to feel a sense of proactive ownership, of understanding the load that puts on their own energy. So sometimes with clients, I refer to it literally as load management. And what I really mean by that is that the amount of energy that they give out versus what it is that they kind of give back. So for people who are really thinking about, well, how do I say yes? How do I say no to activities that are coming my way? If you know your mission, or if you know your core values, or if you know those areas of strength for yourself, I think it's pretty easy to then look at the activities that are coming up to say, will I have a chance to live my mission or to live my core values by participating in this activity? And if the answer is no, I would like for everybody to feel a sense of peace or safety to say no to the event, because I think that's where people become disengaged. They lose their energy, or something bad might happen, right? So if we find a way to say, here are the things that matter most to me in my life right now, mission, values, strengths, goals, whatever those things might be. And if this doesn't align, it is okay and safe to say no.
I'm curious, do you ever utilize or practice with calendar blocking?
Yes. That is one of the things that after I kind of get into it with a specific client, after we do a couple of activities, that's one of the very first steps is I'm like, okay, tell me, can I look at your calendar? And let's look at the distribution of your time day to day. And then I'll have them rate the amount of their day on a scale of 0 to 10 for what % they are actually able to live their mission or their core values or their strengths. And oftentimes it's a very low number. So then we have to go through and say, okay, what can we stop investing time into? And then what can we block on our calendar to make sure that we have more rejuvenation time, right? More time for ourselves, more time for the things that are actually meaningful or that we care about. So it's hard, but it's a very critical step in finding happiness for yourself.
So aside from calendar blocking or really looking at time management, are there other ways in which we could really help ourselves to alleviate some of that stress or anxiety?
I'll give you a quick process that it might take a couple of weeks to deploy, but I think it's a really effective one. And I think when we get into stressful environments, we essentially have to say, okay, and I'll have clients keep a pain journal. It sounds a little bit bizarre, but for 2 weeks, I ask them to keep a pain journal. And then if they do that, undoubtedly inside their journal entries, there are patterns in there of things that bother them consistently. And so when we can see those patterns and we can come up with that data, then we say, okay, let's make sure that we don't create situations or scenarios where we go into environments where that feeling or behavior or fill in the blank is likely to be. Right, so it's one of those things where people have to think about energy management and time management somewhat simultaneously. And there's a great rule. It's called the 5x5 rule. And it's like, if this thing is not going to matter in 5 years, I'm not going to think about it for more than 5 minutes right now. And so it's another really basic way for us to kind of come back to center and say, how important is this really in my life? Is this worth being stressed out over, or is it not? Because oftentimes it's not.
So do you tie that to like emotional resilience?
In some way, I think there is, because, when you think about it, emotional intelligence, you think about resilience in that way, it is a little bit harder for some folks to have the courage to self-regulate their own emotions, or to learn how to do that, or to learn the importance of, relationship management long term. And each of those things requires a resilience where if you're being rejected, or people are telling you no, or you're having to do things you don't necessarily like doing, you have to build a resilience to keep motivated and to keep powering forward to do something in accordance with a goal that you would like to achieve. So I find a connection and a correlation, and it's hard for people sometimes, I think, to think about their own emotional intelligence or resilience and say, how do I improve this? Who can I have help me? And there are any number of ways that can happen. But if people are willing to do that deep work and say, hey, I want to be better at this for those around me or for my own happiness, the likelihood is that in a very short period of time, 1, 2, 3 months, they're going to be far more emotionally resilient and not triggered by the same emotional events they were before.
I don't know know about you, but I just feel like I continue to see more conversations, more events talking about emotional intelligence. Have you seen that trend to be true for you as well?
I think so. I think there is this odd shift happening in in America, but also in some other places. And it just randomly popped up on a search the other day. MIT Sloan published an article earlier this year about how emotions in the workplace are not noise, they're data. And so here's an institution that's very, very well known for hard skill learning, publishing studies and material talking about the importance of collecting the data of emotions. And so that to me was a very surreal experience to go for, because when you think about some of the traditionalists and baby boomers in the workplace, they were taught in their younger years to just go to work and just do the work. We're now learning from Harvard, from MIT, from these very, very well-known institutions that building up an emotional resilience, building up emotional intelligence, and talking about it in the workplace is becoming more common, but also expected.
Interesting. So for employers here in the local market, how could they start facilitating some of those conversations? Do you have any ideas?
That's a challenging one. And what I try to do with organizations where maybe there's some early Gen Xers or some baby boomers on the leadership team, and that was never really part of what it is that they wanted to do or talk about, I ask them to look at their employee engagement survey results and really digest them by department or by service line or by whatever they do in their organization, and really start to look at which teams are most engaged and why. And once we really look at that data, then we can say, okay, in order for this organization to grow and become better, we need to address the lower areas of employee engagement. And oftentimes we can go to those leaders or to those departments and we can re-engage a person by having them do self-reflection, say, here's my mission, here are my core values, and here is essentially my goals. Now, what I ask them to do is draw a direct link between their mission, their values, and their goals, and the organization's mission, values, goals. And when we do an activity to draw that connection between the two, then all of a sudden you start to see a movement within the team where they're now all of a sudden saying, I'm interested in this, I want to do this, and here's why. As opposed to just, you need to do this to do this. So when people start to see that difference or make that small transition to connecting their own mission and values to it, then all of a sudden there's movement.
Yeah, I've seen that too. I'm curious. So when you're not busy doing presentations or reading all of this great information, because gosh, you are like a wealth of knowledge, you know so much. How do you like to spend your free time here in the local community?
For me, I love to be outdoors, and I think that's where I get my energy back. And so when I was 8 years old, I started playing golf. And so my golf game is not nearly what it was years and years ago. But if I can, I will get out with friends and I'll play a round of golf. I will also get out with friends or sometimes alone, and I will go for hikes. And like the Metro Phoenix area is absolutely fantastic for hikes. And for me, I'll get to a very secluded place in the hills or in a mountain somewhere, and I will sit there and meditate for 30 to 60 minutes and just really calm my energy, because being an introvert and very task-oriented, being around a lot of humans and helping a lot of humans day to day, it can extract my energy rapidly. So whether the golf course, whether being out for a hike, whether experiencing some of the really cool restaurants or shows or things that exist in Metro Phoenix, like for me, the being in nature is probably the thing that gives me the most energy.
Well, I think it's great that you have that self-realization, like you know who you are and what works for you. So it's great that you do that and you practice that. I think it's taken me a couple of years to finally figure out what that looks like or what it should be, and finding the balance. Do we ever find a balance in life?
No, I don't think that that's possible. And it's not that we can all strive for it, right? But work-life balance is like, the way that I equate this is like when you think about the justice scales, there's only ever one point on the justice scales where work and life balance. And so that is hard. I think we're moving to a place in human history where we're moving to work-life integration. And so how do we bring our most authentic personal selves to work? And then how can we be allowed in some way to take our work selves home? And so the more authentic we are in both of those environments, the easier it is for us to feel in balance or to feel energized or to feel okay. So it's just taking time to get there.
Well, and speaking of energy management, I mean, if you feel like everything you're doing is cardio, you're running on a treadmill all day long, eventually you're going to fall off the treadmill. So yeah, I do think there's a lot of truth behind like finding some sort of balance.
Yeah.
You and I completely agree in the sense that, showing up as the most authentic version of yourself, I mean, that's led to a lot of my own personal success.
Yep.
And I feel like a lot more professionals, especially some local leaders here, are taking note of that as well.
Agreed.
Andrew Kolikoff is another good friend of mine, and he and I have that conversation on a regular basis. So I'm curious, as you are talking to other local leaders, what other trends are popping up in those conversations?
One of the things that I think is changing, I'll use the term collective consciousness maybe as one of kind of the phrase I would use is when you think about, as of October 2015, the millennial generation, those born between 1980 and 2000, as of October 2015, they became the largest percentage of the American workforce, which is roughly 158 million people. And they have a very distinct need, same way as Gen Z, to like to participate in teams at work. They're very collaborative, I think, by nature. So that's how they learn. That's how they like to accomplish goals. That's how they want to do project work. They want to be able to celebrate with one another. And so I think because of that shift in movement to it's just now their time in history, that we're starting to look at and say, okay, we're moving to a place where we have to be very conscious of the people around us and how we interface with them and what's happening. So we're dealing with collective consciousness, I think, at the same time as a very big shift in transparency. Blockchain, the World Wide Web, social media, really a lot of things about life are no longer kind of kept close to the chest, right? We can see them very transparently in many ways. And that's a hard adjustment for some people to make, is to say, we're moving to a workplace where collective consciousness and transparency kind of run kind of the operations day to day. But the baby boomers were raised in a time in history where that wasn't modus operandi, it was command and control. And so that transition from command and control to motivate and engage isn't exactly going smoothly. But eventually, let's say 5-10 years down the road, it'll be very good.
Are there any organizations or companies that you feel like are doing it exceptionally well?
That get that? Honestly, I don't know, like locally, if there are. There possibly are. I have a feeling that smaller to medium-sized businesses who have a little bit more leadership that they value or are motivated by kind of that collaborative mindset. They don't necessarily have to be a millennial or a Gen Z person, but if that's like their value, if they start there, that's important. I do know of a local marketing company that when they're making really challenging and tough decisions, their board sits down or their executive team sits down and they choose the core value by which they're going to make the decision. They don't make the decision based on profit motive. They make it based on, here's the core value we're going to use, the lens we're going to use to make the decision. And they're a younger team, if you will. So I think that that's starting to happen more and more and more. Smaller to medium-sized businesses will eventually then trigger bigger businesses to do it at scale too. It just takes time.
As far as investing in your people from an organization, I mean, certainly companies could hire, life career coaches to come in or guest speakers. Is there any really cool, unique, innovative ideas that you've heard out there?
Have you seen the TV show Billions?
I have.
Okay. So I have been told that I am Wendy Rhodes. I don't know this to be true because I don't watch TV a whole lot, so I don't know if what I do is like Wendy, but I've been told that what it is that I do is like that. And so I'm not saying that what I'm doing is ahead of the curve. I'm just simply saying that we're now starting to see it happen at scale, so much so that there are television shows about it. So I think Wendy could be somewhat construed as a staff psychologist. So when you think about this younger generation who is in debt, they're getting married later, they're struggling to find jobs, they're changing jobs every 1.5 years, they don't have a house, right? There's all these things that are different about the younger generation versus more experienced generations. So that drives excessive levels of anxiety and nervousness. And so what we have to do to combat that is to have people trained or entire staff like departments that their only purpose is to make sure that they serve as like an internal staff psychologist. And you could kind of parlay it as being like the EAP program that would normally happen through a medical services provider. Definitely keep those, but also add in potentially some sort of an internal human resources counselor or staff psychologist whose purpose is to make sure that they're there in the moment on the spot to deal with any significant emotional issues. Because the younger generations respond well to dealing with the concern or the issue instantaneously. Whereas sometimes with EAP, it might take 24, 48 hours or more in order to get something handled. So if we take that in-house, now all of a sudden we can deal with the situation sooner and get back to productivity sooner.
So you're saying that there's been an uptick as far as people actually hiring that employee as part of their staff.
Yes.
And do you feel like employees are as open or vulnerable when are they afraid that information is going to get back to the executive leadership team?
Sure. Oh yeah, that definitely happens. And that's the thing that somebody like me who provides that service somewhat as an external third party inside of a company, where I have non-disclosure agreements that make it really obvious that if I do something, I'm on the hook for a large sum of money. So, but we can take that same mentality around essentially an internal NDA and say, let's make sure that these individuals have that in place and they know that what it is that they're addressing or talking about doesn't necessarily have to go into a personnel file, right? Because it's a personal issue that they've dealt with that just happens to have come into the workplace. If there was something that employee did wrong to another employee, to a vendor, to a customer, then that's a personnel file issue. But for the most part, if something bad has just happened at home and someone needs an ear to vent to, that isn't something that necessarily has to go in a personnel file. So it's finding that balance between what is the thing that gives that person peace or safety in the moment to release, right, that tough emotion, and then to get back doing the stuff that they're supposed to be doing in work.
So based on the conversations that you've had, I understand that you have NDAs in place with some people, but I'm curious if there's like a trend. Do individuals usually come to you with personal things that they're trying to overcome, or is it more so professional?
85 to 90% personal. And so for the contracts that I have with organizations, their employee bases have access to my email or to some sort of like scheduling tool with me. And when I get those phone calls and take those phone calls, 85 to 90% personal. And it's just because in America, right, the work versus personal thing has always been divided, right? Personal was at home, work was work. But because of the integration of those two things today, those things are becoming more and more and more popular. And that's why we're seeing that shift to the Wendy Rhodes of the world, providing encouragement and counsel and traditionally personal services, but doing it internally.
Michael, I know we could talk all day, but I'm curious if individuals want to find out more about what you're doing or the services that you offer, or they want to follow your fashion blog, whatever it is, where can people find you?
We can talk about my cat, Cleopatra, all day. So www.michaelsseaver.com. There are two S's in the center because my name is Scott. So michaelsseaver.com. And there's a number of links on there to videos, to the podcast, to the blog, to online courses, a number of things that I have available if people desire to peruse them. And I probably share the most authentic material about myself via Instagram. So just find Michael S. Seaver on Instagram and learn all of the quirkiness of funny socks and funny shoes and cats and all that fun stuff there.
Awesome. And if they want to meet you live, then hopefully they can join us for our leadership event, our AZ BizLink leadership event in January. So Michael, thank you again for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.